I woke up to a mystery, not the kind you read about in thrillers or watch unfold in late-night crime shows. This was real. This was wet. I stepped outside one morning, cradling a warm mug of coffee between my palms, expecting the usual quiet suburbia, still air. Maybe the chirp of a bird that hadn't figured out that singing at 6 a.m. wasn't appreciated. But instead, I found my front yard soaked to the bone, grass glistening, mud puddles forming little swamps under the porch. It looked like it had rained all night, the kind of rain that rattles windows and floods basements. Only it hadn't. The sky had been dry, the forecast clear. No rain, no storm, no explanation. Just water, everywhere. And the hose, my only garden hose, lay slightly coiled near the spigot, its end dripping slow, apologetic drops as if caught red-handed. It was warm to the touch, used recently, deliberately. That's when the first itch of confusion crept into my spine. I live alone. No kids. No roommates. No gnomes sneaking out at midnight to hydrate their underground mushroom farms. Just me and a tomato plant that had been dying since July. I bent down, stared at the hose, stared at the ground, then back at the house. My coffee had started to cool in my hands, but my head was heating up with possibilities. Had I left it running? Was there a leak? I traced the length of the hose, followed it back to the spigot turned off, tightly sealed. It didn't make sense. Still, I told myself it was probably a fluke, a sleep-deprived oversight. Nothing to get worked up about. That was until we opened my mailbox and saw the water bill. $168. Up from the usual $40. That's not just a spike. That's a flood. That's filling a kiddie pool every night kind of spike. I laughed at first, nervously, thinking there had to be a clerical error. Or a busted pipe. Maybe a neighbor kid messing around. But as I inspected my backyard, it became clear nothing else was touched. No broken lines, no busted valves, just that hose, just that perfectly intact, easily accessible, publicly visible, heartbreakingly naive hose. I started asking around, knocked on a few doors, casual conversation, nothing accusatory, just checking if anyone else had noticed weird water usage. Most neighbors were polite, curious, even. Until I got to Karen. Yes, that was her real name. I wish I were making that part up. She had moved in just a few months before. A fresh divorcee with a sharp jawline and an even sharper tongue. Not the official president of the HOA, but you wouldn't know that from the way she marched around with her clipboard and daily audits of everyone's mailbox. She didn't answer the door when I knocked. Just shouted from an upstairs window. If it's about the mailbox paint, I already submitted the complaint. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or back away slowly. I went home, puzzled. Still trying to believe in the best of people. Still trying to find a rational, technical, water pressure-based explanation for the chaos. But Saturday changed everything. I just returned from the store, milk, eggs, the usual. And as I pulled into the driveway, I saw her, Karen, in a wide-brimmed sun hat that looked like it belonged in a Victorian novel, standing dead center in my front yard, dragging my hose across the lawn like it was a leash and she was walking in her privilege. She hooked it to a pressure wash, one of those high-powered ones you use to scrape years of grime off a sidewalk, and began spraying her front steps. Spraying anew, with the casual confidence of someone using their own tools, on their own property, with their own water bill. Only none of those things were hers. She saw me. I know she did. She looked up, smiled like we were sorority sisters catching up after brunch, and said, "Hope you don't mind, just a quick rinse." Then turned around and kept spraying, just like that. No shame, no permission, no apology. I sat there, still in my car, gripping the wheel. My jaw went slack. My mind spun in 100 directions. Should I yell? Should I call someone? Should I just go inside and pretend I didn't see it? I chose the last one. I walked in, set my groceries down, then just stood in front of the kitchen sink, staring at the faucet like it had betrayed me. That evening, I knocked on her door, not angry, just confused, still clinging to the idea that perhaps there was a misunderstanding. I asked if she needed help with her water line, if something was broken. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh no, I just like your hose better. The pressure's amazing. It's basically community property anyway." Right? Community property. The words hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't a commune. This wasn't some utopian dream where we shared everything from tomatoes to toothbrushes. This was suburbia. And water was on my dime. I told her gently, but firmly, that I didn't appreciate her using my hose without asking. She tilted her head like I was the crazy one. "Well, I'm sure the HOA won't mind," she said. "We're all supposed to be neighborly." Then she closed the door. Conversation over. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was furious, though I was, but because I was unsettled. There was something deeply violating about someone stealing your water, not breaking in, not shattering windows, just silently bleeding you dry, 1 gallon at a time. It wasn't just theft. It was dismissal. It was the unspoken belief that my property, my home, no, didn't matter. I emailed the HOA, attached photos, attached the bill, asked politely what the rules were about shared utilities and boundary violations. Days later, I received a response. Short, sterile. HOA speak for, "We don't care. We encourage neighbors to resolve minor disputes amicably." That was their answer. Solve it yourself. I did, or tried to. I bought a hose lock, a sturdy metal one, coated, guaranteed by the manufacturer to deter any opportunistic neighbor. I installed it proudly, like a badge of restored dignity. Karen wouldn't get another drop. The next morning, the lock was gone. Not picked, not forced, cut, clean through, like someone had come in the night with bold ID cutters and no conscience. I stood over the sliced metal like it was a crime scene. My blood went cold. And across the street, there she was, Karen, in a tank top this time, washing her SUV with my water. Again, like the previous day didn't exist, like my words were vapor. I walked over, not to scream, not to fight, just to ask, "Did you cut my lock?" She smiled. It was a tripping hazard. Someone could have gotten hurt. I took care of it, and then she turned back to her sponge, scrubbing her tires like she was polishing a throne. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't someone who caused scenes. I didn't yell. I didn't escalate. I solved. That's what I did. I went back inside, stared at the wall for a long, long time. Not thinking, just absorbing, processing what it meant when someone could violate your space so openly and be rewarded with silence. What it meant when the people meant to protect you, like the HOA, chose neutrality over justice. And what it meant about me, that I'd let it happen. But there's something strange about a line that's crossed too many times. It fades. Until one day, it snaps. That was the day I decided no more solving. No more being nice. Karen had declared war. She just didn't know it yet. And I was going to fight back. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with the kind of vengeance that waters its roots quietly until it grows wild enough to drown a kingdom. There's a strange silence that settles over a man once he's decided to stop being the good neighbor. It's not loud, not bitter, but weighty, like the pause before a storm, when even the birds know to hold their breath. That was me the morning after I realized kindness wouldn't cut it. I sipped black coffee at the kitchen window, watching the enemy across the street in her pink robe, sipping from a wine glass that definitely didn't have wine, looking far too pleased for someone stealing utilities. I hadn't slept. Instead, I'd stayed up reading HOA bylaws, poring over poorly formatted PDFs and vague clauses written like riddles. There were words like neighborly cooperation, mutual boundaries, shared infrastructure, but nothing solid enough to slam down as a defense. She had used the cracks in the system to seep through like mold, and every time I patched one, she found another. The hose lock hadn't been enough. It was just the first act. I knew now that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was entitlement weaponized, the kind that smiles to your face while draining your resources behind your back. I needed evidence, proof, something so undeniable that even the most indifferent HOA committee would have to blink. So I bought a camera. Not one of those giant plastic eyes that scream security no. This one was small, discreet, motion activated, and weatherproof. I tucked it under the edge of my gutter, right above the spigot, angled just perfectly to catch every trespass. That night, I tested it myself. I walked outside, turned the hose on, waved at the lens, checked the footage on my phone. It worked. Clean, crisp, 1080p, confession level, clarity. I slept easier knowing that tomorrow, if Karen dared to return, I'd have something more than frustration. I'd have footage. Predictably, she didn't disappoint. At 10:42 XM, right on schedule, she emerged. I wasn't watching live. I was in the middle of a virtual meeting, nodding at charts while her crime unfolded in real time outside. When I checked the camera later, I nearly dropped my phone. There she was, in full sun hat glory, sauntering into my yard like it was her personal spa. She uncoiled the hose with casual grace, attached it to some off-brand sprinkler contraption, and proceeded to water every inch of her front lawn. Plants, porch, even her inflatable unicorn pool all got a taste of my water. I watched the footage again, this time paying attention to her expression. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't sneaking, she was comfortable. That was the worst part. Her face held the smug calm of someone who believed they were above consequence. Later that night, I posted the video anonymously to the neighborhood Facebook group. The caption was simple: neighbor caught using my hose daily. HOA won't intervene. Thoughts I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, maybe a sympathetic emoji. But the post exploded. Comments poured in, some shocked, some laughing, others furious. People had stories about Karen yelling at kids for skateboarding, about her calling animal control on a blind man's service dog, about the time she told a woman to repaint her mailbox because glossy red was too provocative. It was like a collective dam burst. Everyone had their Karen scar, and suddenly I was the one holding the torch. The next morning, things felt different. A neighbor I barely knew gave me a thumbs up while walking his dog. Another waved with both hands. Someone slipped a note under my door that read, "Thank you for standing up." She once tried to fine me for having a hammock. Karen, meanwhile, had clearly seen the video. She wasn't in her usual robe. She wore business attire as if dressing professionally could restore order, and marched across the street with the fury of a woman about to request to speak to the manager of the universe. She knocked. I opened. She didn't even say hello. "You violated my privacy," she snapped. "Recording me without consent is harassment. You're creating a hostile environment and—" I kept my voice calm. "You walked onto my property, repeatedly, without permission, and used my water. That's theft." Her arms folded, her lips curled. "You're exaggerating. It's just water. It's not like I burned your house down. Besides, this is a shared community. You're making this into something ugly." That was her specialty, downplaying, deflecting, distorting. But I didn't flinch. "Then stop trespassing," I said, or what she challenged, eyes narrowing. "You'll call the water police, do something about it. I dare you." And there it was, the trigger. That one sentence turned the story. She might as well have handed me permission. I didn't reply, just closed the door. But inside, my brain was already spinning. I wasn't going to email the HOA again. I wasn't going to buy another lock just for her to destroy it. No. This time I was going to give her exactly what she wanted: water, but on my terms. It took a few days of planning, a few drives to the edge of the neighborhood, a few conversations with a construction crew that was setting up portable sewage tanks for a nearby roadwork project. I told one of the workers I was doing a backyard irrigation experiment. He laughed. I handed him a little cash. He shrugged. Just mess with the pump, he said. You got one night, that night under the veil of darkness. I rigged the system, ran a second hose underground, hidden beneath the hedges, connected it to the tank, built a manual valve switch near my garage, labeled in tiny Sharpie Clean and Karen. I tested it once using a sealed bucket. The smell nearly knocked me over. It was perfect. A trap designed not just to humiliate, but to mark. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, she came, right on cue, same hat, same strut, this time with a new rotating sprinkler in tow. She looked around, didn't see me, and turned the spigot. At first, nothing. A sputter, a gurgle. Then it happened. A jet of thick, brown, sewage-laced liquid burst from the sprinkler, spinning in a majestic arc that splattered her lawn, her porch, and her pristine white wicker furniture. She screamed, loud, high-pitched. The kind of scream that makes neighbors peek out their blinds and consider calling 911. She tried to turn off the hose but slipped on the wet grass. Her hat flew off. The sprinkler kept spinning. More screams. I watched it all from the garage, hidden behind the door, grinning like a man who had just balanced the scales of suburban justice. A few people recorded the chaos. One even shouted, "That's what you get." By the time she managed to shut off the water, her legs were soaked in sludge, and her once-white sandals were now biohazardous. I didn't gloat. I didn't walk outside. I just waited. A few hours later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside, a typed letter accusing me of chemical sabotage, environmental warfare, and psychological harassment. She threatened to sue, said she'd already contacted the HOA, that I'd gone too far, but it didn't matter. I had footage, witnesses. And most importantly, I had the truth. That night, someone uploaded the video to Reddit. It hit 2 million views in 24 hours. The title, "Karen Gets a Taste of Her Own Hose," and the comments, glorious. But I wasn't done because I knew Karen wasn't. She wasn't the type to disappear. She was the type to regroup. And I was already preparing for her next move. Karen didn't show her face for 2 days. The house across the street, usually a stage for her daily pageantry watering, barking orders at delivery drivers, inspecting flower beds with her clipboard like a homegrown inspector general, was eerily still. Curtains drawn, no car movement, no passive-aggressive gardening. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath after the sewage sprinkler incident. But I knew better. I knew silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Karen wasn't sulking. She was preparing. And so was I. The video had gone viral faster than I expected. I hadn't even posted it, someone else did. A neighbor from 2 doors down had filmed the whole sewage spectacle from their second-floor balcony and uploaded it to Reddit with a title that read like a war headline, "HOA Karen learns what happens when you steal the wrong hose." Within hours, it was everywhere: TikTok edits, Facebook mom groups, even a YouTube version with slow-motion replays of Karen slipping in the sludge while dramatic opera music blared underneath. The internet did what the HOA never could. It gave consequences teeth. But even as the video gained views and support poured in from strangers who'd never stepped foot on our street, I knew the real battle wasn't online. It was coming from across the cul-de-sac. And sure enough, on the 3rd day, the knock came. 3 short taps, not hesitant, not rushed, confident. I opened the door to find Karen in full costume blazer, low bun, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weaponized thesis. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 2 members of the HOA board. One I recognized, the other I didn't. The first was Jerry, the board's secretary, an ex-military man with a fondness for laminated rules and an allergy to nuance. The other was Marla, newer, with the kind of smile that always looked rehearsed. Karen spoke first, bypassing pleasantries as usual. "We're here to formally address a property conflict and an escalating safety concern," she said, eyes sharp, voice like glass. I didn't step aside, just nodded slowly and asked if they wanted to come in. Karen immediately cut in, saying she didn't feel safe entering my home. That made Jerry raise an eyebrow, but Marla scribbled something on her clipboard as if it were the smoking gun. "We've received a formal complaint," Jerry said, clearing his throat. "There are accusations involving unsanitary substances, intentional sabotage, and the creation of a hostile living environment." I said nothing at first, just watched Karen's eyes for a flicker of victory. There it was, just for a second. She thought she had me cornered, but the HOA would be her personal sword again. I raised a finger, excused myself, and walked back into the house. I returned moments later with a thick folder, neatly compiled, labeled, and highlighted like I was preparing for court. Inside were printed screenshots from the motion-activated camera feed, complete with timestamps. A full timeline of every instance Karen stepped onto my lawn, dragged my hose, used my water all without consent. I included copies of my inflated water bills, my prior emails to the HOA, even a signed statement from Glenn, the neighbor with the hammock, confirming he'd witnessed her using my hose before. But the pièce de résistance was a copy of the HOA's own bylaws, Section 4. To be highlighted in neon yellow. Any homeowner caught trespassing on another resident's property without express permission, particularly for the use of utilities, will be subject to investigation, fines, and potential suspension of HOA privileges. I handed the folder to Jerry, who took it with the reluctant respect of a man who'd been expecting nonsense and received ammunition. As he flipped through the evidence, Karen's posture shifted, her arms crossed tighter, her jaw clenched. Marla kept scribbling, but slower now, less sure. Karen tried to interrupt, said the videos were manipulated, claimed I had stalked her, that I had set traps, but the words didn't carry the weight they used to. Not now, not against proof. Jerry looked up, expression neutral but firm. "We'll need time to review everything," he said. "There will be a special board meeting this week. Until then, please refrain from any further interaction." Karen protested. Of course, said she deserved immediate action, that I was dangerous, but they were already turning away. For the first time, her words didn't echo like gospel. They fell flat. After they left, she turned to me one last time. Her voice was lower now, sharper. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." I didn't blink, just met her eyes and replied, "They already do." That night, I posted a summary of everything, no sarcasm, no embellishments, just facts. I shared how the situation began, how I tried to handle it through official channels, how I protected my property when those channels failed. The response was overwhelming. More neighbors shared their Karen experiences. Someone said she once tried to ban Halloween decorations because ghosts promoted anti-Christian energy. Another admitted she'd been fined twice for excessive laughter during backyard barbecues. Even the quiet ones, the fence sitters, started speaking. Something had shifted. Karen had ruled through isolation, through subtle intimidation and bureaucracy. But now she wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting everyone. The day of the HOA meeting, Karen showed up early with a stack of printed emails and a folder marked evidence. But word had spread, the room was packed, not just with board members, with residents, real people who'd stayed silent too long. They didn't yell, they didn't chant, but their presence was loud. I wasn't invited to speak, but I didn't need to. My folder had spoken for me. After 2 hours behind closed doors, the board issued their decision. Karen was fined $500 for multiple counts of trespassing and unauthorized utility use. She received a formal written warning. Any further incidents would lead to a temporary suspension of her HOA privileges, including her ability to file complaints. When she exited the building, her face was blank, not furious, not smug, just empty. She didn't make eye contact, didn't speak, just got into her car and drove away. The next day, her driveway remained dry. Her porch, usually swept twice daily, was gathering leaves. The hose mine lay coiled peacefully in its holder, untouched. But I didn't take the cameras down. I didn't disable the valve switch. because I knew Karen. This wasn't over. Not yet. The silence that followed was strange, peaceful, yes, but also uneasy, like the eye of a storm. For nearly a week, nothing happened. Then, one evening, I found another envelope on my doorstep. No stamp, no address, just a single handwritten note inside. You may have won this round, but this neighborhood won't be yours forever. I'll be back. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Angry cursive, tight loops, the same style as every HOA complaint she'd ever filed. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so Karen. Dramatic, vague, and ultimately meaningless. The next morning, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. No announcement, no interactions, just workers boxing up her life, the flower pots, the plastic flamingo, the surveillance-friendly porch chairs. By sunset, she was gone. Vanished. No wave goodbye, no final speech, just an empty driveway and a for sale sign by the mailbox. The house was bought a week later by a young couple with a toddler. On their first day, they came over with cookies and asked politely if it was okay to use their own hose hookup. I nearly cried, but the story didn't end there. A few days later, I received an email. It was from a guy named Devin, who lived in another HOA across town. He'd just inherited Karen as a neighbor. He found me through the viral video. The subject line of his email read, "Help, she's doing it again." I replied with everything he needed: the camera setup, the valve rig, the folder of bylaws. I even included a PDF I titled Karen Defense Protocol. He responded with 3 words: "This means war." Devin's reply hit my inbox like a distant flare from another battlefield. This means war. There was no hesitation in his words, only quiet resolve, the kind that comes after the first act of disbelief has passed, when politeness is exhausted, and a man is simply tired of being trampled by the same entitled force of nature. Karen had resurfaced, as I knew she would, in a new neighborhood, among new faces unaware of her history, still innocent to the patterns. But this time, she wasn't just picking on the vulnerable. She was walking straight into a network of resistance. I sent him everything, not just footage or schematics, but blueprints of intent, the camera placements, the valve system, the psychological shifts required to deal with someone who weaponizes faux victimhood. Devin was a quick learner. He didn't waste time debating morality or HOA gray zones. Within a week, he'd upgraded my design with a compost tea line less hazardous than sewage, but twice as pungent and entirely legal. He triggered it during what he called the flower bed incident, where Karen had dragged his hose to rinse off her dog after a muddy walk. The footage showed her slipping again, this time into a rosebush, cursing as fertilizer tea soaked her sneakers and stained the steps of her porch. It wasn't graceful, but it was glorious. The video didn't go as viral as mine, but it didn't have to. Word spread. Not just in his HOA, not just in mine, but across online communities that had been silently tolerating their own Karens. Suddenly, I was getting emails, messages from strangers, requests for setup guides, defense strategies, legal advice. I hadn't meant to start anything. I just wanted my hose back. But now I was apparently the reluctant founder of a movement. I decided to lean in. I built a small blog. Nothing fancy, just a plain theme, a place to archive what I called Suburban Defense Chronicles. I started posting stories, not just mine or Devin's, but anonymous submissions from others, people who had dealt with neighbor tyranny, HOA corruption, or the slow erosion of personal boundaries under the guise of community spirit. Some stories were funny, some infuriating, a few heartbreaking. One man wrote about how his neighbor reported him to the HOA for lowering his flag at half-mast after a friend's funeral, claiming it was visually disruptive. Another woman shared how a board member fined her for the reflective glare of her solar panels, even though they met all code requirements. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were data points, proof that Karen wasn't a person anymore. She was a pattern. A symptom of a deeper rot in how power behaved when unchecked behind white picket fences, The blog gained traction. Then came the shirts. Someone on Reddit made a design a coiled garden hose shaped like a snake, with the words, "Don't spray on me." It was a parody, of course, but it sold out within days. Others followed HOA before Bros Hose Wars veteran, and my personal favorite, "Make lawns free again." It should have felt silly, but it didn't. It felt connected. Like we were all survivors of the same invisible war, now finally acknowledging each other in public. Meanwhile, Karen had gone silent, not vanished, just quiet. Devin said she stopped making eye contact, avoided confrontation, even skipped an HOA meeting where she usually commanded attention like a senator. But that kind of silence never lasts. A month later, I received another envelope on my doorstep. This one didn't reek of threat. It reeked of strategy. Inside was a printed legal document, city letterhead, stamped. A formal complaint had been filed against me, alleging the installation of an unauthorized waste disposal system. The accusation, illegal redirection of biological materials into a public environment. I laughed when I first read it, out loud, alone, but my laughter faded as I scanned the fine print. There was a scheduled inspection, a real one, and if the claims were validated, I could face a fine or worse. I called the city office immediately. The inspector on file was a man named Reyes. I asked to speak with him. To his credit, he was professional, asked a few routine questions. Then, off the record, he chuckled and said, "I saw the video. My niece sent it to me. Just tell me it's not permanent." I told him it wasn't. Just a prototype, temporary, reversible. He sighed in relief. Good, because it was genius. But you didn't hear that from me. He came by 2 days later, checked the yard, examined the spigot, confirmed the valve was off, said I was clear. No violations. No problem. As he left, he turned and added, "For the record, I've lived through 3 Karens. You handled yours better than I did." I offered him a bottle of water. He declined, smirking. "Only if it's not from the hose." The Karen saga had officially crossed into folklore. And yet, despite the validation, I remained on guard, because movements attract counter-movements. Where there's resistance, there's always someone trying to reestablish control. I received an anonymous message through the blog's contact form one night. "Not everyone in the HOA agrees with your tactics. Enjoy your 15 minutes. It wasn't signed, but the phrasing was familiar. Performative, vague, Karen-esque. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The next week, a proposal was circulated through our HOA board, a motion to limit personal surveillance equipment on residential property unless pre-approved by the HOA. It wasn't subtle. It passed first review with 2 signatures. But when it was brought to the full board, it failed spectacularly. Residents showed up in person, dozens of them, not just to vote, but to speak. They quoted bylaws. They referenced my case. They talked about respect, privacy, and the right to protect what you pay for. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a reckoning. Karen didn't attend. Rumor had it she'd tried to return but backed out when she saw how many people were waiting. One neighbor even brought cookies. Another, a printed sign that read, "This hose is clear to flow." It was cheesy. It was perfect. And yet, the most important moment came later that evening. I was in the backyard, trimming the overgrown hedge line near the corner. The house that used to be Karen's was quiet. The young couple now living there had turned it into something soft. Wind chimes, a toddler swing. At one point, the mother waved to me over the fence. Her hands were wet from playing with a garden sprinkler. I waved back, and then I heard it laughter. Real, loud, unfiltered laughter. Not mine, theirs. The kind that fills a yard, not with noise, but with life. It was the child, running in circles, chased by water, followed by the sound of peace reclaimed. For the first time in months, the hose was just a hose again, and somehow that made it more powerful than ever. It had been 31 days since the hose had last been touched without permission. 31 days of sunrises that didn't start with surveillance footage, of water bills that returned to pre-Karen levels, of neighbors who smiled like the cul-de-sac finally remembered how to exhale. Her house was no longer her house. The flamingo was gone. The porch, once swept with militaristic precision, had been reborn under a layer of sidewalk chalk and scattered toys. I walked by it once and caught the faint scent of grilled cheese and bubble soap drifting through the air, like proof that peace didn't always come with silence, it came with life. But peace, as I'd learned, is always temporary, especially when you've embarrassed someone whose power relied on invisibility. One Thursday afternoon, I returned from work to find a small manila envelope tucked under my front doormat. It wasn't mailed, just slid there like a message smuggled across enemy lines. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper, folded into thirds. I unfolded it, already knowing the handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, tight, overly intentional, like someone trying too hard to control me to see something already slipping away. You may have won this time, it read, but this neighborhood won't be yours forever. I'll be back, stronger. No signature, no threat of action, just the hint of return, like a villain's closing line before the screen fades to black. I didn't laugh this time. I didn't even segeo. I just stared at the words and felt the tension coiled in my chest return, not panic, not fear, just the cold understanding that people like Karen don't accept endings. They rewrite them. But endings have a way of choosing themselves. That weekend, the moving truck came. No announcement, no drama, just quiet footsteps and cardboard boxes. I watched from the porch as the last pieces of her existence were packed away, the patio furniture no one ever used, the planters she never watered, the wreath that always looked like it was trying too hard. She didn't wave, she didn't look. She was in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead as the truck pulled away, as if afraid that one glance back might validate everything she tried to dominate, but ultimately lost. The new family was different. Young, kind. They knocked on doors their first day and introduced themselves with cookies still warm in the box. They asked if it was okay to host a barbecue the next weekend. They even offered to lend me their spare hose if I ever needed it. I almost cried. Not because of the gesture, but because I realized how long it had been since I'd been asked instead of assumed. That weekend, the barbecue happened. The whole street showed up. The hammock guy, the family with the rescue beagle, even the woman Karen once called the front yard fashion nuisance for wearing pajamas outside on Sunday mornings. We stood around burgers and folding chairs and laughed about the videos, about the drama, about the way water had somehow become a symbol of something so much bigger. But it wasn't until I heard the toddler giggling under the sprinkler that it hit me. This wasn't just a resolution. It was a reset. The hose, once a weapon, had returned to being what it was always meant to be: simple, playful, forgotten until needed. And I could have let it end there. But something didn't sit right. I kept thinking about the letter, the threat of return. The way her final move wasn't confrontation, but suggestion. It was too quiet, too incomplete. So I did what I do best. I dug. I ran her name through property records, found a forwarding address. Out of state, a gated community with an even stricter HOA. I almost pitied them. Then came the second email from Devin. She's moved again. He wrote, new HOA, new victims. She's already reported someone for putting wind chimes too close to her patio. And she dragged someone's hose across 2 lawns yesterday to clean her car. Sound familiar? He attached a photo. It was her, older, slightly more tired, but unmistakably her. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the image and realized something unsettling. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was a system, a mindset, the belief that control was owed, not earned. That silence was the same as permission. That anyone who objected to the erosion of their space was aggressive. I knew then this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a cycle, one that would repeat until someone disrupted it with more than just a prank. So I made a choice. I took everything I had: footage, documents, stories, and compiled them into a digital archive, not to humiliate her, but to educate others. I called it the HOA Defense Toolkit. Inside were guides on legal surveillance, templates for formal HOA complaints, diagrams for hose valve systems, and most importantly, testimonials. Real people, real resistance. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in. People from states I'd never been to, countries I'd never visited, stories eerily similar to mine, different names, same blueprint. I started getting requests to speak at HOA reform panels. Someone even invited me to a TEDx event. I declined most of them. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I didn't want to be famous for revenge. I wanted to be useful. So I kept the blog, quietly updated the toolkit, answered emails, one at a time, and I left the remote valve in place. Not because I expected another Karen, but because I now understood what that hose represented. It wasn't just about water, it was about sovereignty, about saying, this space is mine, this line is not yours to cross. A month passed, then 2, then 6. The hose remained untouched, coiled, serene, and then one evening, while watering my tomatoes, finally thriving, for the record I heard a soft voice from the sidewalk. "Excuse me," the woman said. She was maybe late 30s, wearing a sun hat and holding the hand of a small child. "Our hose broke," she continued. "Would you mind if we used yours? Just for a quick rinse of his hands." I looked at her, really looked, not for signs of a trap, but for the thing that mattered most: humility. Her posture was open, her tone sincere. I smiled and nodded. "Of course," I said, walking over and uncoiling the hose. "Thank you for asking." And just like that, the cycle broke. Not with sabotage, not with surveillance, but with a simple gesture restored to its proper place. Because sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. It's about teaching the world that boundaries can coexist with kindness, and that even a garden hose, when defended long enough, can become a symbol of dignity.